I believe that the CEO's primary job is to continually and responsibly increase the value of their organization over time. Whenever we're cutting costs to save a little bit of money this month that will harm future value to be created, that's not in alignment with that. So we're going to continually and responsibly over time increase the value of the business. We have to do things that may not, create as much material value as we could for this month or this quarter, but the net result, if we're doing all the right things, should continually increase and have a much better result on average, 1, 2, 3 years out, depending on the business.
Wow, what a great way to end this new revised edition of Your Most Important Number. We're here with Lee. I'm really excited to dive into this new chapter. As always, there's so many little nuggets and gems that we can kind of pry and dig into. But before we do that, maybe let's take a step back and take a look at, why write this new edition now, this revised edition, and kind of what was some of the background that was going on through your head when you wrote this new chapter, Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. So working with hundreds of companies, applying the MIND methodology, getting it out in the world, occasionally it wouldn't work. And I've seen other operating methodologies deployed that didn't work. And the CEOs would say, gosh, I'm doing everything right. I've implemented all of this stuff. Why isn't it going anywhere? So the title of this chapter, which is chapter 8 that we've added to the book, is why sometimes CEOs fail. And the subtitle, does your team really understand? And what I mean by does your team really understand is, do they understand how your business was designed to create value? And, a great question to ask, leaders in a business is, hey, how do you create value for this business? And often you get a job description. You don't get anything around the business model or strategy or the value of the products and services, culture, that stuff, right? So that's why I decided to write it. Like, here's something that can really help those get away from applying something cookie cutter and hoping for the best, and see why that won't work and what you can do just to change it a little bit to get significantly better results.
Yeah, and I think, when you talk about the value creation, I think a lot of CEOs and leaders within organizations understand at a high level, maybe the material value creation, but the emotional and the spiritual value creation is either non-existent or just a kind of an unknown. How did you kind of come about of the emotional and spiritual value creation? Because as you mentioned, they're equally as important to the overall operation and success of a business.
Yeah, they really are. So the value of a business typically is some measure of the material value. So it could be profit, like EBITDA, whatever it is. And then there's a multiple of that. Could be revenue, depending on the industry. If you want to supercharge that, you also need to create value, in my experience, in the emotional energy bucket as well as the spiritual bucket. And the spiritual side is really just about connectedness. So emotional energy piece of it, to me, is this superpower for leaders. It's like how they show up, how they passionately talk about where we're going, what's possible, and engage people in productive conversations on how to actually get there. That is so important. So when you say, it's non-existent, it's just not focused on. It's always existent. It might be on a scale from 1 to 10, 2. But we want to be more intentional about it and make the emotional energy a 9 or a 10. And then the spiritual value creation piece on the connectedness side, what are the rituals that we engage in as a company to actually, create more, connectedness with the employees?
You mentioned something really, key there, is that these are the emotional and spiritual values of a business are super critical, right? And one thing that I've always struggled with, and I'd love to get your take on, is how can you measure that or quantify that in a business setting? Because it's easy to measure EBITDA, it's easy to measure profit, net profit, gross, all these things that we look at on a P&L or a balance sheet. Is there a way that you can, kind of measure and track progress on things like spiritual and emotional value creation?
Yeah, and I think that all goes into the bucket of culture. And so how are we applying culture to create more values in organization? And I think the goal for all of us is to create a value creation culture in the business. So everybody is creating more value as a business. So simply stated, culture could be the attitudes and behaviors that cause the most value to be created. And if you have an intentional culture, as I've described earlier in the book, you have a set of alignment tools, a mission, a vision, behaviors, values, whatever that is. Now, how are team members intentionally living those things to create value? So you can start capturing that and make a direct connection to culture and actual value creation.
One of the things that I like to do is go to the floor in our manufacturing environment. We can talk about culture and mission and vision at a high level, right, in our leadership meetings, but really getting where rubber meets the road and asking them for how they interact and what that means and how they put it into practice on a daily basis. Is that something that, as from a practicality standpoint, that you would encourage or add to? Kind of how do you view make driving that down through the whole organization?
Yeah, 100%. Now you're getting into one of the main reasons I wrote this chapter, and I call it value creation nudging. So when I look at a business and how it's designed to create value, there's four areas that are super important. There's the business model, there's the strategy, there's the value of your products and services, and there's culture. And when you look at each of those on the business model side, how do we price? And then what are all the expenses and approaches to producing our product and or services? What's the profit left over after all expenses? And then the really exciting part, what's the potential for future profit? So in this one example, I think a lot of leaders get frustrated that why are my team members making the decisions that they're making? Well, if they don't understand the business model, they can be doing things that make sense to them, but it's going against the business model. So whenever we're in meetings and we hear things that are going on, decisions that are being made, actions being taken that aren't in alignment with the business model, I want to nudge them in the direction of let's get it more in alignment with the business model. It could be as simple as how we price. If we charge $1 too much, we lose. If we charge $1 too little, we leave something on the table. And are we continually improving? What are all the pieces of the business model? So constantly nudging there. Same strategy and improving the value of our products and services as well as culture. When it's not in alignment with those things, we should be constantly nudging. What you'll notice over time, when you do that, you'll have to do less of it with the leaders. And then you've really arrived when you're noticing them doing it with their team members. But for us, Charlie, if we don't have our leaders fully up to speed on our business model, strategy, what's really going on in the eyes of our customers around the value of our product and services and culture, how could they possibly make the best decisions that would create the most value for the business?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that how we put it into practice is always that it's great to read in a book, and then how you put it into practice in your business is so critical, right? And one of the things that I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping you can touch on for the listeners, is you mentioned to me in a different setting, was this idea of the town halls that you would have, where you would pull everybody together once a month and really kind of use that time to educate and maybe nudge. Can you kind of share or expand on kind of what that looked like so people can maybe take a practical takeaway to how they may be able to implement this idea of nudging and sharing the strategy, sharing the best practices and the value creation through the whole organization? I'd love to kind of learn more.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the biggest challenges I think every CEO has is making sure every team member is fully aligned to what we're trying to do as a company. Just that's hard. And I also think a lot of CEOs believe that or assume that they are a lot more aligned than they actually are. And one of the things that I did that you're referring to is, and I did this, the largest company that I've started from scratch had about 500 employees at the time I sold it. I would do it every single month. I would take one day, set it aside, and I would meet with all of the team members, by function in the organization. We would combine a few of them, et cetera. But all day long, I would do these hour meetings, by function. And the first half hour is me talking about this is where the company's going. These are the things that we're thinking about. Here's what's possible, and here's what we're learning, what we need to solve for. Like really giving them a handle on what's happening for the business or within the business right now. And the cool thing about that is there's never a rumor mill that would take off. last more than 30 days. So they always heard from me, this is exactly where we're at, where we're going, and what we needed to get there. And then the second half of those meetings that were an hour long was that particular function talking about what they were doing. And they would say, well, here's how we create value for the organization. We'd measure it in a number. Here's where we started. This is where we're going today. We're currently, for example, right on track. And this is the best work we're doing to continually improve it. So every single month, I would rinse and repeat, and it drove incredible alignment around where we were going as a business and what everybody needed to do to get there. And everybody got to showcase the amazing work that they were doing to continually create more value for the business. And if you think about all these functions, engineering, production, HR, finance, all of it, customer service, supply chain, marketing, sales, like all of it, these pieces all fit together and need to create value together. So doing this one day a month brought out the best of everyone, kept them fully aligned, and encouraged cross-functional collaboration for the departments to actually work with others to see how they're improving their most important numbers and how they can work together to make it synergistic, if you will, to create even more.
Yeah, total transparency. And, I think it leads into this other question, and I think you may have just answered it, but I'll ask it anyway, because I think it's important when we talk about material value creation. I've seen examples, and I'm sure we can both bounce off ideas of different companies who's put, stock prices or material value above things like the quality of their product or service. And they've made that so important that they've often overlooked and cut corners in certain functions of their business. How do you balance the two, right? Because sometimes I think in my business, I may have to use more expensive tape so the box doesn't break in transit. If I'm thinking solely from the function of material value, I can use the cheapest possible tape, right? So how do you go about balancing this idea of material value creation with the strategy, but also maintaining the integrity of your product or service?
Yeah. I believe that the CEO's primary job is to continually and responsibly increase the value of their organization over time. Whenever we're cutting costs to save a little bit of money this month that will harm future value to be created, that's not in alignment with that. So we're going to continually and responsibly over time increase the value of the business. We have to do things that may not, create as much material value as we could for this month or this quarter. But the net result, if we're doing all the right things, should continually increase and have a much better result on average, 1, 2, 3 years out, depending on the business. So we have to think about all those things. And when I think about all three buckets, if we're only focused on money above all other things, the emotional energy in the business starts to go down. It can go down far. And then you lose this productive, high engagement in creating values in organizations. So now you're harming the material value. And then the connectedness side of people are just transactional in the business to where they show up, I get a paycheck, I do this thing, and I leave, and they want nothing else to do with it. That's not going to be very helpful either. So if we're not working on the emotional energy piece, we're not working on the connectedness piece of it, people aren't acting like the CEOs of their own roles, which is what we want them to do. And so we get, 20%, 30% productive engagement, right? What's your experience there, Charlie?
Yeah, I think it's really, for us when we're dealing with aerospace hardware, getting people to understand the why. And I think it's to that for us and we're a long-term thinking company. So we want to think and make decisions that extend beyond the quarter. So in that example of the tape, or as an example, we're thinking about the customer, not for just this month and saving that 25 cents on the roll of shipping packing tape. We're thinking about the longevity of keeping that customer happy for years and decades, having, we've been in business for 60 plus years. So thinking about it from that view and that long-term thinking has really helped us balance exactly what you're saying, all those things together, and making sure that employees know that we're making investments into the company, into them. And that's to make everybody's life easier. That creates this value, that connectiveness that makes our products and services that much stronger. the best, teammates want to be here. So I'm right in line with kind of how you've approached it.
Yeah, and if material value is really important, focusing on holistic value and making sure you're getting emotional and spiritual correct, or the connectedness piece right. I've gotten significantly higher multiples selling my businesses because of doing those things. And if we're sitting back just saying, "Oh, this line item, we should have only spent this or spent that. We can cut here, we can cut here," and that's the only lens we're looking at, and we're not putting it into some sort of a formula that looks at medium and long-term value creation, that's where we really miss. So if money really is important, please do these other things.
Sure. And I think the key is responsible, right? It's like you can have someone come in, cut everything, but is that the responsible thing for the longevity of the culture and strategy, which I think is everything that you mentioned hinges on the responsible efforts. And I think, especially from a leader's perspective, and that actually leads me to kind of an idea I noticed throughout the revised edition, this concept of masterminds kind of sprinkled in throughout. I'd love to kind of learn and dive a little bit deeper into kind of what these masterminds are. Obviously, there's some competition there. How does your mastermind stack up? What makes it different? And kind of really try to understand what that can do for leaders in their value creation journey.
Yeah, great question. I've been part of CEO masterminds with overlap for more than 40 years. Vistage, quite a number of other ones. And I think there's a lot of value there in community. Most of them, though, are centered around some sort of an issue processing, process, if you will. And what I noticed, these groups can be 12, 16, 18 people. And every meeting, and these would be all day meetings, you'd go around the table and everybody would present an issue. People would ask questions and give them advice. And the issue almost always was a symptom of something else. But because we couldn't see very deeply into each other's business, it was really hard to help. So we would give advice around one thing, and that wasn't moving the needle. And so I wanted to create a group of CEOs limited to 8 at the most. So full is 6, but 8 is the max in a group, to where we know so much about each other's business that if they bring an issue or any challenge that's coming up that is a symptom of something, we're going to go right to the root cause. And every 2 months, we're doing a deep dive on everyone's business. And everyone that comes in to these groups, they have a perspective that, hey, my job is to responsibly and continually increase the value of my business, and this is my group to help me do it. And we even take it one step further. When they come into the group, we require that they sort of metaphorically put on the hat as though they've invested over half their retirement money in this conglomerate setting a table, and we want to get a really good return in our retirement so we have the lifestyle that we want. So it's not just showing up, getting what you can get for your business. You're actually cultivating your capabilities to lean in and help others grow the value of their businesses. And it is super valuable leaning in to do that with companies that aren't your area of expertise. Like, we all grow so much when we do that. So that's why I decided to do it. We needed something that was evergreen, know into how we can grow the value of each of our businesses, and not have stale processes that we keep going single month. Yeah.
It seems like having a smaller group allows you to get deeper. A small cohort of 8 people allows you to really get into the weeds versus I've seen some of these mastermind groups that tend to be large and you barely touch on your business, or you don't have the time, right, to really get into the details and nitty gritty, where in most cases the challenges arise is a nitty gritty kind of detail related culture or strategy. Is that kind of one of the main benefits that you've seen since starting and launching these groups?
Yeah, it really is. And in the other groups, let's say you've got 18 in a group or even 12. Usually, one CEO or member gets to present something on their business a month. That's it. And you get to go once a year, every year and a half, and they always end up being like sales presentations. Look how good that I'm doing over here, instead of, really need help with this. So in these execute mastermind groups, we know what the most important number is for each of the members' businesses are. It's how we basically would value the business. We know where they started, where they're going, and are they on track, at risk, or behind it. in every point in time. And then our job is to make sure that every member is doing the right work at the right time in the right place to continually responsibly increase the value of their business. And because we limit it to 8 members, every 2 months we get to do a deep dive in everybody's business and we track all of this stuff. So it's not having 6 or 7 more bosses. It's an accountability group. And more than that, you get 80 to 90% of the brain power in the group because we know so much about each other's business. We can really dig in and help. When you don't know a lot about everybody else's business, maybe they're getting 10 or 15% of the brain power in terms of focus on solving your challenge of growing the business.
You really can leverage each person's unique experience to attack challenges and problems. And I think that sounds really intriguing for folks that want to have that community. It seems like a pretty cool tool belt, and a piece of tool in your tool belt, rather. And that kind of lends to the next observation I had, and I hope that we have some time to touch on, is this distinction between the mind methodology and the mind management system. In the revised edition, I saw the mind management system kind of come to fruition. So I was wondering if you could kind of take a few minutes to talk about the distinction between the two and why make that distinction.
Yeah, in its simplest form, the mind methodology, most important number in drivers, just changing the language within teams or organizations of any size, really start to move the needle in the right direction. So mind methodology is just sort of a basic foundation. On top of it, the reason we're now referring to it as the mind management system is that there's so much more. We deal with compensation and culture, and team member engagement, all the different ways of measuring strategy, business model. So it's a really holistic, comprehensive management system. And so it felt like a more accurate way of describing what we're doing here than just the mind methodology. And again, that refers to the foundation, super important. As you get the foundation in place, it's now an amazing lattice to add anything and everything else on it. And a lot of systems out there that say this is what you do, it's almost like if you cookie cutter apply all this, it'll just work for everybody. That almost never works. And so when we have the foundation in place with an organization and we can say, oh, we need to incentivize folks to drive better behavior. So now let's work on the comp program. And that could be different where we need to focus for every single business out there. And there's a lot of examples of companies that their compensation or incentives haven't driven the right behavior. And one that you met was Boeing. If I could go in there immediately, I would get alignment at the top and then change the comp and incentive program to drive the right behaviors for long-term value creation, not short-term shareholder value.
Right. I think that makes sense. Build the foundation and then build on it with the entire ecosystem, like you mentioned earlier. It's the HR, it's the sales, it's the marketing, it's the operations, it's engineering. All of it coming together is truly a system that is built upon the methodology. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, and kind of wrapping up, I always like to ask folks, what is one question that you wish I would have asked you? And what would your answer be?
What is strategy? And my answer would be quite simply approaches to increasing the value of the business. And I love that way of thinking about strategy because when I phrase it that way, almost everybody understands it. When I just say strategy, almost nobody fully understands what it means.
That makes sense. And then it's so easy to talk about strategy, hard to execute, hard to really grasp it and immerse yourself in it. And I think that's a really good way to kind of summarize it. Well, everybody, I want to again thank Lee for taking the time to read this revised edition of Your Most Important Number with a new chapter, Why CEOs Sometimes Fail. Lee, thank you so much for the time. And I know that I took some big nuggets and takeaways from this, and I know that our listeners will as well. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Charlie.